Hi, Anna. Good
Good
morning.
morning. We are recording.
So it is November 12th, yes. Time is marching along.
Yeah, it's a submission plus 6 weeks approximately, right?
It is. Day after. So just to kind of catch up a little bit because it's likely that others will join. Doug, you were talking about some aftermath after our sessions. Just curious as to what you mean by that.
There were sort of some ripples, and my sort of processing. I haven't even finished screening both of the sessions because of incoming, which I'm just experiencing. I think because of the centers of gravity that I'm touching these days. So there have been these propagating waves from a half a dozen different places, and I'm sort of trying to figure out how to handle and grapple with all of the signal, and also underneath that figure out, do I have to? Is it important? Is that an important thing or not? And I've also had sort of residual from these sessions. I'm still carrying around what happened to the Me Too follow-up. Because your very understated but clear signaling, landed. And the last session that we did, Anna, you really sort of shook some things loose. Because I found myself thinking about buying into the carve out of the psychopath as a label. And why should there be an exception? If there's one exception that carries a label and it's justified and warranted, then of course it opens the premise to all labels are valid and warranted. And your position, if I heard and experienced you right, is that no labels are really relevant or appropriate. The truth of the matter is everybody's a human being. And on the bell curve of states of being, there are some that are fully functional and some that are not, and some that are, some that are more empathetic and some that are not, and some that have more egregious consequences of their actions on others and some that don't. So I think I've landed in your camp. I couldn't rationalize or justify the label anymore as an exception. But what did come out of it for me, and then I'll stop because I really don't want to run on this, but I've been stewing. So I might as well vent, is that the level, the idea that the collective in relation to somebody who either has the potential or has exhibited the potential to be really destructive, how the collective deals with that person, allocates resources to that person, suspends judgment of the right or the wrong or the good or the bad, but thinks about it purely from a social collective commons interest place. What does that look like? Clearly it's not prisons. Clearly it's not punishment centered. But what is the generative, value centered, human being centered? What does the alternative look like? And the only thing that came up for me was that, if you go back to real, tribal patterns and roots, the tribe took care of everybody. And if there was somebody who was low functioning, they were taken care of. And if there was somebody who was high functioning, they were given a little more responsibility because they could see for more people. And, you know, if somebody was destructive or whatever, they had a way of sort of keeping an eye out. And with that, I'm complete.
Hi, everyone. I know we haven't had our go around, but I just want to plant another or put another couple of pieces of information in there. And is that okay that I do that? Okay. So, Sam, what you don't know and what hasn't come to surface here is that, like we talked about having our one-to-ones prior to the session. So Anna and I did that. And part of what we talked about was, because I hadn't caught up on that. So part of what we talked about was about this misunderstanding, which brought it into the field. And then just prior to our session, I read the thread. So there was some energy that was coming into the meeting that around this piece of conflict and of missed understandings. And personally, I'm experiencing probably the highest level of conflict in my life that I've ever experienced. You know, I've got two crazy, huge fires going on that are centered on conflict. So I myself was deeply considering what conflict was going into my conversation with Anna. So part of what I just wanted to include that in terms of how our conversation progressed. And I did review the entire session myself and saw that we had begun to talk about conflict prior to you coming, and we were unearthing that. And I just want to report to everyone too that Sam and I had, I don't know, an hour and a half long conversation afterwards on the phone. And what I understood from Sam was that he was talking about the billionaires and the people that are harvesting all of the resources as a cancerous kind of activity on our planet, and that's one of the things that needs to be rectified, which I didn't hear in the session that we had. And when I heard that, sort of tagging onto your point, Doug, I was like, oh, well, I do have some judgment about those people, certainly. Hi, Aaron. And so I just wanted to kind of put those pieces into our collective knowing, and just in terms of the timeline. Oh my gosh, wow, there's Aaron and a friend. Hi. So we do have, I would love to do, to carry on with going around the round properly. So I wondered if there's a, let's just check in and say where we're at. I'm good. I'm curious. I'm so excited and interested in how our conversations are progressing and how we're coming to a really beautiful liminal space together. And I'm also feeling some strong passion to more deeply align and move together in whatever way we decide. So I'm just super grateful to be here and to know you all. And I'm looking forward to our session.
I can check in. Since the last call, I actually have been reviewing in some detail, back and forth, start, stop, the last Thursday session. And I still have about 25 minutes to go to actually go through the entire thing. But that, still is over 2 hours and 50 minutes, okay? So I have a number of apologies to make. Tammy, I did interrupt you, but we'll go through that in some other detail. I was also doing a little bit of simple math. And I was trying to say, in this particular mechanism of really understanding each other one-on-one, how do we do this when the group grows? That presumes that we want to grow, but let's, for the moment, presume that there's some growth that we see as desirable. To really invest the time to really do these one-on-ones, especially if they're three-part one-on-ones, and just try to figure out, okay, so in a week, in a month, in a year, in a quarter, how do I really get to know everyone if there's a sense of responsibility to at least know some certain number of us in these one-on-ones, and or to review the one-on-ones that actually are recorded. What is the logistical, what is the life-supporting investment that is necessary and or required or responsible or appropriate when we do this? And I think that there's some consideration that we cannot actually get to know everyone once we scale, obviously, to 8 billion, but even if we scale to 150. So there's still some questions in my mind how we get to understand each other. And then, yes, I did also do a number of other thinking around other themes in the Thursday conversation. I did very quickly pick up that conflict was already a theme prior to my arrival. And it might have been an opportunistic thing to just say, hey, let's try something, And in any case, it turns out to be very, as Doug uses, generative, so long as we're all plugged in here and able to deal with this. The last idea before I sign off in this round is, more and more appropriately, I do think that certain crucial themes coming out of Patterson's work, the Crucial Conversations work, I think very much could be useful here. Let me just introduce one, and that is that, and many of you are familiar with this, that when there is a disagreement, we can actually discuss the content of the disagreement in this space between us. Let's call this, a pool of meaning, and we put facts and, observations or whatever, we put them together. There seems to be a reasonable conclusion we can both come up with if we're rational people working with each other. So that's step number one, is this pool of meaning. Okay, he introduces this term, which I think is a very useful one. But in crucial conversations where there's high disagreement, high emotions, and high stakes, so when triggers happen, there are high emotions. When the future of the planet or even our community is at hand, there are high stakes. When that happens, then the first notion Patterson introduces is this notion of safety, which I think I did refer to last call. And the safety, we still don't really understand what that means between us. We don't understand whether or not it's the ability to reinforce, the ability to interrupt, the ability to state something without interruption, So I think there's this notion of safety that might be useful for us to at least express, if not actually agree. Okay? I don't actually require agreement. I just want to know what each person's notion of that is. And maybe over time, and I'm introducing a Dictopedia notion here, maybe over time, we as a group might form a community notion of what safety is. And likewise for all other values and terms and concepts and whatever, okay? But let's start with at least two concepts, okay? One is how we communicate, and part of that, okay, is what is safety? And I'll stop there for now, okay? Anna, you're on mute. Anna, you're still on mute.
Okay, done it now. So this morning I had an amazing walk, got stuck in a place that I couldn't get out of. It felt really scary, and I'm here. So it's just, it felt very challenging, and I'm glad I did it, but it was scary. So I'm feeling good about that. Then about these themes, well, I think what's come from the me-mine thing, it's come down to greed. We've been talking about greed. And I think that is a much more interesting way of looking at these definitions. As you said, the billionaires. So I would be happy to talk about it from that point of view. We have sort of touched on it on the Facebook page. The other thing that's come up is something that Harry brought up, which is about gender qualities and differences, which is a really interesting topic. And I've been reading, particularly, I sent something to Tammy about the role of women, or the contribution of women in the past, which has been suppressed and ignored. So there are or denigrated, for example, witches or shamans, women healers, and people who lived closer to nature, used natural remedies, taken over by men, the medicine doctors, and we all know about the burnings and so on. But all of that is still, somehow it's not really it hasn't really come into human consciousness properly yet. This is what it feels like to me, that before patriarchal culture, there was a culture in which the two genders were not, it wasn't that women were dominant, but women played a much larger part than they do now. And it feels like that's something that we need to understand when we're thinking about, what's gone wrong with our human development and how we can address it in a way which brings the genders back into some sort of equality. Okay, I'll stop there. It's a lot.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for hearing me in this. First, I want to express my gratitude for simply being here with you guys in what Emily rightfully calls a very liminal space. So it's a space between all kinds of value systems, and I'm very much myself in disarray about my core belief systems. And as I am in the process of a total transition, you can see maybe the stacks of pile of stuff piled up as we are in the middle of our separation here, and also that evokes a lot of fear and pain and all kinds of stuff that's so hard to handle, and as you're trying to grasp the truth in it. And so I feel this disarray on a very personal level, and in relationship with my what was the term for it, the most important person in your life. And then there's all kinds of groups I'm in, and we're talking about groups as our group and the things we try to define in other groups, like those billionaires over there, and we're talking about the whole system. And on any scale, I can kind of feel the same tensions and patterns. And I think this is why groups like this are very important, because we know we don't know, but we try to sense and feel what needs to be done there.
I'm just sorry to interrupt, Harry, but there's some sounds on the line. I wonder if your mic is.
No, is this better like this?
I think it is. Yeah, thank you.
Oh yes, I was trying to probably touching my outfit here. Okay, thank you. So what was I? I very much like the way this conversation is going, and I like the pool of meaning Sam introduced as a concept. So I think we have to kind of take the courage and dive into this pool without really knowing what has to come out of it. And yes, so with that I'm complete for the moment. I think I said the most important things.
Doug, did you want to jump in? I know we both did a little mini check-in prior. I don't see Aaron and his friend there, so you're up.
Oh, there he is.
Well, maybe we should check in quick. At a collective intelligence workshop in Madrid, at the park, taking a break. And my friend is at the workshop, so we kind of thought it's kind of fitting to just check in. And might drop out depending on battery, but kind of cool, right? Collective intelligence, so it fits. So anyway, yeah, if I fall off, it's battery or something like that. But good to see you all. So. Yeah. Oh, and Luke is actually part of the group too. He's been officially invited.
Hi, it's a pleasure being here. Yeah. Mostly here to listen,
Hi.
and sounds very interesting.
All right, thanks. Nice park too. Really nice, beautiful place. Anyway.
Aaron, would you just give a little bit of a download in terms of the collective intelligence workshop? Like a little more framing for us so we can sort of put that into our pool of meaning, which I love, Sam.
Luke, do you want to take a shot? Luke's more core than I am to it, so.
Sure, yeah. The Collective Intelligence Workshop, it's actually called the International Collective, in Spanish it's the Collective Intelligence Workshop for Democracy, and a lot of it is driven by a participatory budgeting group called Decide Madrid, and they've invited they have about 8 projects from all over the world who were invited to Madrid to work on them together, and so it's a very international crowd, and we are all working largely in like the civic tech space. It's sort of like a 2-week workshop or a little 2-week hackathon, and a lot of these projects are ongoing, but we come together, brainstorm ideas, work together, and the idea is that it sort of fosters a collaborative effort across colors, and then we can move forward and just kind of get like a refresh of our ideas, sort of reframe the projects that we're working on. I'm working on a collaborative mapping project, and so that's sort of my role in it. But yeah, we're all just working together and just getting better acquainted with each other.
That's fantastic. I just would plant a seed that one of our group, Peter Anderson, has a project called Vocalize, which I would love for you to have a look at, just in terms of to be able to engage communities in a democratic way, to be able to harvest that collective intelligence and solve community problems. It's active, it's working. I do have a podcast that I did with him a couple of days ago, which I'm happy to share, as well as the links to his work.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I actually pointed it out to Luke a little bit, but anyway, yeah. And Luke's based in Seattle, actually, by the way, so.
Yeah, I'm happy to share some of my links, as well for, links to the workshop, links to my projects, everything else.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, everybody.
I love this thickening of the plot in the network.
Ditto.
Doug, do you want to just jump in and do a check-in while we're all present here?
Sure. You know, Sam, the thing that you raised about, you know, the idea of scale, and it's sort of like, do we have to worry about it? Is what comes up for me. That if we can plug into a sort of rhizomatic vision that says it's going to unfold and emerge the way it's best suited to, if we sort of stay true to human-centered and values-centered in relation to fill in the blank, for want of a better way of putting it. And one of the things that came up with Tammy and I in the follow-on was, you know, I have the Thursday session with GCC overlaps with an Enlivening Edge, which is a George Porteal group for me, around the same window. And that one of the things that popped up that sort of emerged for me was, you know, as each of these communities figure it out between themselves, what might it look like to have two of them flow together for an hour? And how does that work? I mean, and because my experience with this has been that it's not about planning or figuring it out or preconditioning or expectations or any of that stuff. It really is about in the doing, because if we're human being centered and experientially centered, that's the source. That sort of becomes the wellspring. And I'm just really curious. Let me put it a different way. There's a tendency, I find myself having a tendency to want to fully bake this here with this group and however it grows, as some sort of progressive, aggregative, like, you know, thing. And I don't think that's a requirement. Like that we have to achieve a certain level of cohesion or whatever before you could like go for what happens if two groups merge together. Like it can be undefined and it can be sort of a little, you know, unbaked, and be okay, and that generatively we'll figure it out. And to your trust point, yeah, like if we have trust, and if as a sort of a foundable, everybody that is that touches each other, internal to a group, two groups coming together and whatever, as long as there's trust, then I think we can figure out and get to clarity about the differences, about the reactionary stuff. Because the reactionary stuff is us doing ourselves as human beings, right? And there's just one last punctuation mark. I'm a real yin and yang person in the way I see everything. So when you mentioned that before, that really resonates for me. And separating the individual as a messenger with their particular setup, orientation, beliefs, frame of reference, emotional buttons, all of that, from the message and from their entitlement and empowerment and enfranchisement as part of the collective. Those are like three different things to me. and certain of those elements are stronger and more important than others. And I have zero reactivity to the individual and unique human being part of it, where it may or may not be a perfect messenger or a perfect agent for whatever reason. It's about getting through that to what's the essence of what they're trying to communicate? Like, what is it they're seeing? Because the energy behind it is where the value is. And the energy behind where you were coming from in that last session pointed to something really important. And the energy of where Anna was coming from was really important. And getting to that and having that inform me, having me learn from both of you, was where I experienced all of that from. And that's the trust part. That's the, like, we're all human beings and we're all in it together. So, like, there isn't anything that can divide us substantively. There's just figuring it out. And I'm complete.
So I'd love for us to just take a moment to really feel into what wants to emerge between us today. So maybe we can just take a minute of really connecting with each other and connecting with this field. And whenever someone is moved to speak.
I just want to say, and it may be unnecessary. Are they going? Looks like they're going, yeah. So I felt what was happening, Tammy, what you said was a reflection of what was happening already, and maybe didn't need to be put into words, although you accurately put it into words. I'm wondering what would have happened if you hadn't said it.
Said what? Which part?
Whatever you said. Let's take a minute and just see if who wants all of that, because it was happening already. And we're talking about sort of leadership, and do we need to say those things? Can we just recognize that it is happening? I don't know. I'm also just saying something that maybe didn't need to be said. I don't know. I was feeling it, so I'm saying it.
And I like things to be said.
I think that's a part of us normalizing, coming together and really merging our expectations and our culture. So I see in this case, actually, and I very rarely use this phrase, I do see both sides of this on this point. So I'm going to go touch back on about 4 or 5 different points that came up in these introductions, and I'm hopefully going to do it quickly. I think that the notion of safety is still important. I think the notion of greed. By the way, Anna, I proposed my understanding of greed and what I offered in that group discussion as places to start. I know that they're imperfect notions of greed, but as a place to start and for people to respond to, I think, that's why I was offering those notions. And that reflects this constant learning, this constant, iterating, this constant agile growth notion that I have embraced, but may not be an explicitly stated value. Next thought is that of labels. I know that labels are divisive. They are, in some sense, judgmental. But you notice that if we do not use words, we don't really communicate in a medium like this. We can sit together side by side looking at the stars, and there can be a lot of communication going on without words. But if we're going to sit here, it's tough to achieve that same level of connection in this medium. So I don't have the aversion to labels and words, although I'm very aware of the danger of using labels and words. The next notion is there's 3 levels of crucial communication introduced by Patterson. If we can actually stick with content of issues, exactly where the rational disagreement is, and stick to the pool of meaning and put things together, things are fairly straightforward. Reasonable people can deal with that, and that's just part of life. That's great. He introduces 2 other levels of conversation, though. That's the first level. The second level is when we see a repeated disagreement or a repeated notion of crucial conversation coming up, which then begins to form a pattern. If there is a pattern, then it's useful to try and understand that pattern, because if we don't, and that pattern recurs, then now you're up at level 3, which is where now the relationships are threatened. So if we're actually able to deal with disagreements and put them aside and we go along our merry way and they don't seem to recur, there never needs to be a step up to level 2. But if level 2 is not addressed, eventually level 3 is going to come and relationships will, in a sense, fall apart. And I think I like that model of crucial conversations and safety, and I just wanted to introduce that here, if it's useful. The next one, Anna, is I owe you a very, very deep thanks for sending the 4 Days to Redemption video link. I watched that. It was very powerful. Those men, and I hope I said this and I hope you got it, those men are not what I was referring to as cancerous. Those men are well on their way towards becoming better people themselves. Now, I understand better is a label, but it's used in the context of that particular video. And so I do think that in the notion of flows of systemic thinking, when there is a flow that stops, when the flow of food is stopped, when the flow of money is stopped, when the flow of air is stopped, when the flow of water is stopped, when the flow of compassion is stopped, when the flow of gratitude is stopped, then I think we have an unhealthy situation. Then the entire organism, by which I refer to the community, loses a certain level of health and eventually could become diseased. And that's the notion in which I was introducing the term cancerous. Okay. And then the very last thing is when Doug mentioned trust, to me, trust is not transitive. We're not yet in a community or a culture where trust can be transitive. And by transitive, I mean if I trust person B and person B trusts person C, then I automatically trust person C. And even if we were in a highly trusting community, I'm not even sure that's the right thing to do or to be or to adopt. I'm not yet clear on that. Okay. So this idea of trust, and Doug, I think you used the phrase, if we have trust, yes, but having that trust as the community grows, I think is a much more complicated situation. I think you recognize that, but I think I just wanted to say that big if is a huge if. So I just wanted to respond to certain things, and there's more later, but I'm going to stop for now.
Well, I'd like to come back with what I actually said on Facebook in response to your message that these weren't the cancerous people that you were referring to, that I don't see a difference between those people that you're referring to, the billionaires, and those people who were in that video in prison, except that some have powerful situations and have positions of power, and the others don't. And that is the only difference that I see between them. So to call one lot cancerous, I would say it's a cancerous system that puts people like that in positions of power.
I don't fundamentally disagree. I really don't. I think if it's a matter of terminology, what I was saying was that, if you notice in the video, I said cancer exists. I wasn't necessarily, going through the entire metabolism of it and identifying certain factors and identifying certain things. I wasn't placing judgment on cells. I was just saying cancer exists. And it is having a deleterious effect on the community, the organism, the body. That was the point I was trying to make. Now, your exception is a huge exception. Having power and not having power in this society, in this current time, is a huge difference. Just like a cell in a different context with other cells around it would not be cancerous. But in a situation where it's fed a lot of sugar and blah, 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 and has all these other effects, it becomes cancerous. Likewise, I was not indicating value judgments on the cell. So in a sense, your statement about the system is cancerous, yes, that's what I meant when I said there is cancer.
I just wanted to pick up on two threads. One, on the sort of progression of disagreement. And there's a quote from Orwell that I'd love to share, where he says, "The point is that we're all capable of believing things which we know to be untrue. And then when we are finally proved wrong, impudently twisting the facts as to show that we were right. Intellectually, it is beyond this process for an indefinite time. The only check on it is that sooner or later, a false belief bumps up against solid reality, usually on a battlefield." And to me, language is the second most powerful sort of ingredient of generativity of creation. It's really powerful. And it's also really literal. Our language individually, my language reflects my reality, like literally. And we don't take each other literally. But when we do, it's energetically, it's like, gladiators. Like that's the level of energy and power behind choice of language. And the spirit underlying, the intention underlying sort of determines the outcome. That it's much more of a being and emotional reality in terms of human being centered, empathy centered, compassion centered, completely changes the conversation and changes the nature of how language is given and received and wrestled with. And Anna, I also screened the video and actually saw a lot of what we do in the workshop that I teach, like even some of the approaches and techniques and the healing and the generative stuff that was going on. And it was really, really powerful. And, you know, to me, I've crossed paths with a lot of really affluent 1% people in my life who relate to other human beings not in their classes as house pets. And I've crossed paths with some really hardened people that have really lost touch with who they are as human beings. Both are human beings. And on an extrapolation basis, we have to be able to bring the kid strapping a vest on back into the fold. We also have to figure out how to bring the oligarch with the resources to accelerate and facilitate the transformation and distribution to care and take care of our world. They both need the same level of attention and transformation in terms they can relate to that work for them to get to a center of how we're all connected and the same. And I'm complete.
Well, I don't want to hog the conversation, but I would love to focus for a bit on the word greed and how we use it. I think you said it was a greedy ego, Sam. Do you want to say what you meant by that?
I think what I was trying to refer to is whoever said it, that said the world has everything everyone needs, but not enough for everyone's greed. I should recall who that was from, but so the notion is that there are plenty of ways, even in the current state of the world, for us to all essentially thrive, for us all to be healthy, for us all to get the right care, for us all to have the sense of compassion with each other. But there are systems at work that have been set up that extract value, that extract assets, that extract power, that extract currency, and make it not available to work for the commons, for the regular people. I don't know what other word to use for that other than greed. Maybe it's successful gameplay. We could call it successful gameplay. But whatever it is, it's the unhealthy aspect that removes the natural resources and the human-created, protocols, so that many of us suffer while a few of us hoard. HOARD. That's what I'm trying to refer to. Over.
Hi, Glenn. I'd like to jump in and break down greedy ego into the alphabet code. So greedy. So greedy is a 6-letter word. And that means that it holds an overarching energy of interaction. Okay. And just in terms of how we use it, greedy is more of an action word rather than greed, which is, yeah, anyways, I think. So greedy means power activating energy within the foundation for a purpose. Greedy. Greed on its own is without the why. which refers to purpose, is power activating energy of the foundation. Okay, so it's power actually within greed activating thing, and I think that's one of the challenges. But I also wanted to do ego. Okay, so ego is energy of power within the world, right? Energy of power within the world. So a greedy ego would be power activating the energy of the foundation for a purpose, and then energy empowering this world, right? So in the alphabet code, it points us to the underlying purpose of things. This is how I've come to understand how it actually lays out. And it allows us to kind of meta-conceive of why, so that we can align what purposes we might understand from things. So I just thought I'd put that into our soup. Before I move off of this though, I'm really excited about what it is to have us decide what we say next, following on to Anna's, hey, do you even need to say? And Harry's, yes, let's make it explicit. I feel like we're in the guts of the machine and we're trying to understand a new way of knowing and being. And what I'm looking to experience is this place where we all decide what gets to be said next based on a sense of alignment together of our personal and collective purpose, and that there is a natural flow using our collective knowledge and wisdom and sensing of each other to be able to navigate that. And I do know that because I've been, working in this space for quite a while, not that others haven't, but that I have some learnings that I'm testing out with you guys, and also just feeling what it is to hold some power, like in this space I have, and I'm really questioning what that actually is and how it moves, and literally how it moves from person to person as we all build trust together and respect for each other, as well as what happens when we take in each other's information in what we're learning, and as well as the bodies of work that we bring to this space together. So this power sharing is as an antithesis to greed. It's this exploration of what it is what value that we all bring together. Hi, Glenn. Welcome.
Hi. Sorry I was a little late today, but I just had to relax a little bit. But, so what are we talking about today?
Perfect.
So Glenn,
question.
Huh?
yeah, that was the question. But Glenn, I am curious, when you joined, do you actually see all the previous notes from the beginning of the session or not?
You mean in the chat window?
Yes.
I'm not sure. 551. Greed, that which extracts resources so that it is unavailable to the commons. That's the first one.
Is that the first statement that you see?
Yeah. You're muted, Sam.
Okay, so you don't actually see everything from the beginning of the meeting, in other words.
No. But by the way, I mean,
Let me do this. Okay, let me take everything in the chat. I'm going to send it to you as a personal message. Okay, so it doesn't get redundantly created in the group text. Okay, let me do that so you can actually catch up. Okay.
yeah.
I'm fully present, but I have to turn my video off for a couple minutes.
Tammy, I just had a follow-up question. The ego energy of power within the world. Could you sort of share more of that? I mean, as a construct, I'm not familiar with that. And I'd love to hear more of what that means or what the vision of that is.
Can you, do you mean in terms of the alphabet code or what it might mean in the world?
I guess both.
So how I understand the alphabet code, which was a what I would call a download, I suppose. Like it was, I perceived it from the universe. I was, they came to me within about a half an hour period of contemplation, meditation, and each letter just arrived with sound, light, meaning, mudras, both body and hand mudras. And so there was a lot of depth of information that was embedded and encoded in each letter of the alphabet. And so I was, and so there's two things that I understand the alphabet code does so far. One is that it is a ladder of the development of consciousness. So if you go from A to Z, you are able to kind of map a development of human consciousness practice that allows us to do our own personal work and individuate fully as conscious human beings. There's also 27 letters in how the alphabet code came to into my consciousness. So there's an extra letter at the end. And there's three sort of streams of notions or ideas that build on each other. The first one being about the individual. The second group of 9 letters is how we work together, like in relation to each other. And the third is how we transform society as a full system. So yeah, the second is like, what are the tools that we use? How do we actually do this? And the third is actually doing it, right? Now, when you take the letters and break them into language and words as we use them, it points us to the purpose of that idea or notion. So ego, it basically just points us to, okay, what is ego's actual purpose within this system as encoded within the consciousness, our consciousness, and the tools that we use to express our conscious intent through language itself. So language as a conveyor of meaning, and each letter having a specific constituent part that's in relationship with all other letters, right? So there's a universe within the alphabet code that we can use to decode specifically meaning. So ego, then, E is energy. It's the 5th letter. And G is power. It's the letters that definitely correspond to numbers. And so any prime numbers are new energies coming into the system, whereas numbers that are divisible have the constituent parts of those prime numbers embedded within the meaning of them. So G is also a prime number, and its power, its mystical power. You could call it God, right? And so if you take the meaning of God as in power, then ego means the energy of God in the world. And that's actually quite meaningful. Like, we are waking up to the fact that we are gods. We are, you know, part of what is happening here is we are much more than we ever thought we were. And when I say in the world, in terms of the O, it also demarcates a barrier or a limit, right? Like, in that circle, there's a limit to what we can know. So there's limitations that are also kind of embedded in what the world is. We're in a constrained playground here with some limitations around what's possible. So the letters themselves refer to concepts that work together to be able to trigger us to a deeper understanding of our purpose. That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So as I've been really feeling into, like, how do we decide what gets to be said next as our way of kind of navigating power, because it's like it's very subtle, but it's those little pieces that I think we can learn the most from. I have a sense that with the level of trust that we have with each other, as well as our collective intelligence, but both need to be there, that we can unpack an emergent story that allows us to build that plane, so that and that not knowing where we're pushing into is actually really important, because there's so much in our world that has been said that it is a certain way, but it's not based on true reality, whatever that might be. And I think that we're breaking down and breaking through some constructs that are agreed upon consensus reality pieces. Hi, Heiner. And part of what we're doing here, I believe, is testing those structures of that are in place, that are holding this consensus reality in place, literally. And as we come to figure out how to break those things down inside of ourselves, which is why we have to be open to being called out. I don't know if that's right. You know, I'm not feeling that. Like, these things that are kind of the weak signals that Helen Finadori would talk about, those are the things that we need to kind of be quite vigilant in testing and questioning, without a sense of holding back so that someone doesn't get their feelings hurt. Obviously, we want to be able to be kind to each other and loving and, you know, respectfully communicate, but also to challenge assumptions as they arise. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Has there been any suggestions so far about what you said, how to decide what to say? Was there any suggestions about that?
Yes, you decide what you want to say.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that makes sense. I think we have to be responsible ourselves. I mean, I don't see any other other alternative?
Well, maybe I see another alternative. We all have to be sure and secure and in ourselves to know when to speak and when to shut up. But also, we can go to the wisdom of the people to have the people decide. I want to listen to him. I want to acknowledge him. I want to give him attention time as speaking time. Actually, that's what I'm talking about since long. I think we have to do it in various. There's no one quick fix or panacea or whatever you call it.
We did start just before you arrived, Glenn, and before Heiner, we started looking at greed. And whether it's appropriate to use greed, which is a personal, it's usually something that people, that is applied to a child, actually. But anyway, it's applied personally. Whether it's appropriate to use that as applied to a system, or using such, I would say, emotive terminology is already leaving the area of compassion, which Doug was talking about. I wouldn't even go, but leaving the area of neutrality and making a judgment which is not even seen as a judgment. It goes under the radar. Everybody just accepts this quote that you gave, Sam, of there's room for everybody to be satisfied, but not room for everybody's greed. Here's a really emotive adjective being applied to everybody, and we don't even notice that that is actually a statement that a parent would make to a child, or even a child would make to themselves, or other children would make to a child. Don't be so greedy. You know, we're going back into that sphere of accusation, which is very much the sphere where politicians exist. It's the sort of thing that if you watched Parliament on the television, you would see, I'm talking about the English Parliament, you would see these sort of accusations being thrown around and no real respect for differences of point of view. I'll leave it there. Peter, hello, Peter.
Well, I would say underlying this emotion. Sorry, due to internet lag, I think we're sometimes talking over each other. Glenn, you want to go?
Nah, you go.
Okay, let me say something quickly then. That separate from this emotional power, which I think I understand comes from your word emotive, of the word greed, that kind of brought up this other usage of words called labeling. So greed, as far as I understand, is a form of labeling. just as compassion is a form of labeling, just as good or bad or love is a form of labeling. So there is a question of, are we going to use labels, which is almost as fundamental as are we going to use words? And if we don't like the word greed, we can actually associate some other words for similar phenomena, which is useful. But to say we're not going to use an entire word, which is, in its form useful in some contexts, I don't know how to deal with that. Greed, for example, is a fundamental concept in the current vernacular of economics. So one could use that word. And in fact, capitalism is based entirely on, and I'm going to say it again, this notion of greed. There is no mechanism in capitalism right now to value social impact or social benefit, really, other than, you've got these little footnotes in these charters and contracts, but, it's not enforceable, really. And it's not even measurable. People don't look at those things on a quarterly basis. So do we want to use words? Do we want to use labels? Do we want to use labels which are essentially fraught with connotation, or do we want to avoid them? Because to me, this is also bordering on political correctness, which violates my sense of authenticity. Over for now.
Sam, I'm just coming in late because I couldn't find the entry code, but I really resonate what all you're saying here. Not only that Tammy is speaking like it is written, and all your concerns about greed and labels, they're so very dear to me. But let me first start with a more personal thing. I always understood grit and not greed. And for me, I could not understand you for some time. But I'm fully with your concerns about labels and greed, because the pupil of Tagore was Gandhi, and he said there's not enough for all the people's greeds, but enough for all the people's needs. So we have to contextualize. And that is actually what I'm trying to do beyond languages, giving the context and giving the grit. That's why I had the problem with the acoustics and my bad listening and understanding capacity as an alien. No, I'm very happy to be here. I wanted to refer to what Anna just said. I think when we label into we are the people and they are the politicians, and then we look to Parliament television, then we got it all wrong. All this Parliament thing, and I'm very often going also to the German Parliament, is done in the hearings, where they in camera do the negotiations and the juggling and the bracketing, trying to come to solutions. But this is not public. We had yesterday this meeting of Seoul for Europe, where again, all these people were trying to put it into we the people, and then they the politicians. And then it came up, these politicians, poor guys, are always there only for 4 years or whatever, and then they are gone, and only few make it for a lifetime parliamentarian career. So actually, I really fully resonate with you, Sam, that we have to look into wording, how we use words, what we do mean by certain words, and make it understandable to others. And as I have to dash now for the night bus to Bonn, to the climate summit, I only want to give you another little insight, doing all this United Nations ECOSOC bracketing for years as a Sherpa. You see, we were campaigning in the UN to all delegations, to all heads of state, to use the word crisis, because that's another very difficult, vague subject term, they call it in terminology, because the UN has been banning the word crisis from every document 30 years or so. Don't quote me, maybe it was just 20 years. So what's happening, the terminology office says you cannot use in any UN official document the word crisis. That's the same like if you have your town hall and a certain word is banned. Because if you don't say which crisis, with which scales, proportions, consequences, then you immediately have a fight. And so we were, as ECOSOC, campaigning for a couple of years to all delegations to really give the context of the meaning of crisis. And that is the same, the context of the meaning of greed or a need. So these are all vague subject terms. I cannot continue further, but I will listen to you because I really have to pack. It's hectic times, not only in Berlin.
You know, Sam, something came up for me in what you said. It's the use of words is and language as a means or mechanism of exchange, communication, understanding is sort of foundational and really powerful. I think the distinction between words that pack meaning plus judgment into them is the distinction that Anna is making. And unpacking those, you know, when those words come up, unpacking them makes it possible to capture meaning and get rid of judgment. And judgment is just a toxic, contaminating thing. There's nothing good, nice, or valuable or positive that can be said about the concept of judgment. And so if I were to unpack greed, in terms of my understanding of the sort of quintessential thing you're getting to.
Heiner, do you mind muting yourself just so we don't have your...
I mean, if I were to unpack greed, in terms of what it sort of is touching, capturing mimetically for me, it's an outside looking on a concentration of power and or wealth and or things in an individual or a class relative to everybody else. That it's a relative imbalance and distorted sort of distribution thing. And I see that and map that as sort of the logical extrapolated result of a capitalist system that's based on creating scarcity, based in competition, and with the goal of accumulating wealth, power, money, and control, right? Ownership. So, like the principles, the value setup of capitalism is really reduced and simple in that sense to me, right? And if you add those ingredients and stir, you're going to get the 1%. You're going to get 3 guys in America, having more than 80% of the population, whatever, all of those things. So I get that as a linguistic sort of like painting picture. Here's the express reality. Stirring in greed to that isn't about the people holding the concentration of power and wealth or the system. It's about me looking at that from a place of judgment. Now, the judgment for most people, my sense is, it serves the individual as an affirmation of me versus the world, or versus or in opposition to, on an emotional or psychological or belief level. Very subjective, very human, very biological and messy, but it doesn't inform the understanding of like, what is it and how do we affect it or change it or replace it? And I'm complete.
Well, I want to agree with Sam, actually, that at certain points, it's really important to be able to use words that have emotion attached to them. I would support that. And I thought Heine gave a very good example with crisis. It is a word that has a lot of emotion attached to it, and they want to use it. What I see about greed is not the emotion. We need to be able to express our anger, our indignation at the 1% and the 99%. But attaching it to individuals, which is what greed does, is using, for me, it's a way of attacking individuals in a way that I feel is inappropriate, because then we lose sight of the fact that it's the system which is doing that, and we need to fight the whole system. If we start fighting individuals or condemning individuals, I think we're just wasting our time.
Okay, I've been listening for a while now.
Anna, I object. It's only individual. Greed of a tribe, of a nation, of...
Heiner, you've been going in and out. Also, you've just muted yourself. And also Harry was speaking.
Okay. This is all about language. We use language to capture meaning, and so language is very important. I'm happy that we try to express what's important for each of us, and I would like to throw something in the pool of meaning as well. I used the work of Clare Graves a lot, the guy who's behind the spiral dynamics, who grounded it. And he says on every level of maturity, we use the same words in a different meaning. So when we're talking about ego and greed and power, if we're in the red dictatorial state, then power is great. Power is the way to the winner takes all game. And when you win, you're the 1%. No problem at all. There's no greed. You just win. But when you won, like in the bureaucratic system where there's law and rules and all that, then you say, oh, something's wrong or something's not wrong. And then you say, you are wrong because you are greedy or egoistic or not following the rules or the belief system or whatever. So I see these same words in a different situation and context that has a different meaning. So it can be very blurring for conversations like this when we try to agree on what a word should be used or not, whether it's how it should be labeled or not. That's very difficult. also very much in an earlier session, we kind of agreed that agreeing was not helpful at this point. So that's what I would like to throw into the pool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a few things concerning this. Try to formulate my thoughts. So, first of all, I also feel very much what you just said, Harry, about how the same words are used in things. So as far as I can tell, all words without exception are understood quite differently by different people and in different situations, and it depends on who says it, when and how, and the context, and so that's a very very big fluid field. At the same time, there's some words which we can see are memes, popular memes, that they are often used in a certain way, and they can become associated with cultural meaning if they've been misused. So maybe they can even become contaminated, you could say, so that when you hear a certain word, you associate it with certain things because this happens to be repeated over and over and over and over in culture. And some of these memes, they are typically used to describe individuals, people, and perhaps indicate their moral standards or their value or something like that. And I think that may have been what Anna was talking about. So some of those words, I would not use them. I don't know about greed. I don't use that so much, but I don't know why. But descripting words like he's an idiot or let's just say descriptive words of a person which are negative.
Glenn, you're not. We've got some internet burbles here.
We've only very have expected.
Glenn,
Hey Glenn, Tammy was trying to tell you that your internet connection, we cannot really understand you.
Okay.
We just missed that last part that you said.
Okay. I can repeat it. Well, so we're talking about words. They have a relative meaning that shifts, but there is a certain stability to some of them, okay? That should be clear. And then there's some words that have specific cultural connotations, some of which can typically evoke negative reactions and defensiveness, which don't usually help a conversation. And then we have conversations like these, where we talk about the words, so meta language, and we point this out and we give some examples. And then maybe we mention some a danger, problems with some specific words. Okay. So then I see that makes us informed. So that helps us collectively to be a little wiser. And I don't see that we need to have any thought policing, because with all that, then we can each decide ourselves what words to use, when to use them, how to use them. But now this will be more informed because we may have had a good conversation about it. So yeah, I think that is the that's probably where I'm at now. So I see it as everything is potentially allowed to say, but like every word has consequences, and how we say it has consequences, and it's good to be aware of it. And if we are aware of it, then I think it helps. So
Wonderful.
Over for me, yeah.
What you're saying is really, really, really intriguing, because the meta level is just another trick to say we are here and they are above. But what it really means is that we see it also with other eyes from other perspectives. And through this contextualization, we leave the box of one silo. And this silo is called standardization, compatibility. The other of the T is harmonization. And when we don't give the context, it is homogenization. And then it is blaming, shaming, and all this dirty other things. It's so exciting with you. We have to continue another time.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce two notions here. And I'm going to respectfully disagree with a statement I believe was stated way long time ago, that this term serves the individual and does not inform the understanding. If you look at the Occupy movement over several years, there was a lot of groundswell. It was somewhat emotional. It did inform, and it did motivate certain individuals themselves to take action. Now, was it efficient? I don't think it was very efficient. Was it effective? You could argue that. It did raise certain memes, like the 1% versus 99%, into the common vernacular. So when we talk about the use of a word like greed, that for some carries emotive value, and we make an implied or otherwise recommendation to avoid that word, we are ourselves exercising judgment. Behind every word, behind the selection of words, which is the practice of diction, is judgment. Without that, words would come out of my mouth and not have any meaning. The fact that I string them together and I put certain words together and I use one versus another is my judgment based on my values as far as how I want to express a thought so that it hopefully lands as effectively as it can within all of you. And to say that judgment is bad basically removes the understanding of discrimination as a capacity of ourselves. So I think there's a loaded word here called judgment, just like there was a loaded word called value. And there's the implication that judgment is bad. If you really carry that to an extreme, then rationalization is bad. Logic is bad. I think we need to be more careful about these generalizations. And that's, again, a generalization. So that's idea number one. Idea number two is, because of this phenomenon, I've been working to formulate this idea that I've been calling Dictopedia. We can call it whatever you want. But the underlying notion is we each travel with our own language. It's exactly the problem we see in this particular conversation. And that if I use the word greed or judgment in a certain way, we can take the Merriam-Webster or Oxford English dictionary version of that, but in this context, it has more connotation and more meaning than just looking in the dictionary. And I support that, that's true of almost every word used in project teams, communities, legalese, technology, medicine, social welfare, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, certain words have more implications in those domains than you'll find in the dictionary. The problem is the dictionary is published, what, every N years? For OED, it's probably N is a very long time. But when we're actually practicing communication like this, where we're meeting twice a week, this notion of having meanings derived from a dictionary is almost useless. We need to ourselves come to a common understanding of what we mean. But we don't come to that common understanding if we're not initially curious about each other's initial understanding of those terms. So if I use the word greed and that's jumped upon, then that isn't an open conversation that allows us to explore those connotations. In fact, only now are we beginning to do this. Just as the word cancerous had that same effect in the last call. Words will have emotive context based on your experience, individual experience, and to hold someone else responsible for that reaction is itself prescriptive and judgmental. So Dictopedia as a notion is that if we all come with our own language, and again, that's a word that means a lot of things right now, okay? Then Dictopedia is an attempt to explicate and provide a means to explore those differences as a community or team or project, so that it welcomes initially differing meanings, allows a way to explore those meanings, and hopefully provides a means for us to coalesce or converge on one or more to say, okay, when we're talking about this, we're going to mean meaning A. When we're talking about that context, we're going to use meaning B. And hopefully come to one or two or small set of meanings rather than N, where N is the number of individuals. But to not understand that that phenomenon is happening is, again, a form of violence when we're using our values to determine what someone else ought to say. Over.
I want to jump in. Thank you, Sam. And thank you for your work and conceptualization and working with communities around Dictopedia and that whole notion that we do carry our own dictionary around with us according to who we know, the people we talk to, how we collectively understand things. But what I'm excited about is to draw the corollaries between our process in terms of us coming together as individuals to collaborate together towards solving some of the global challenges that we face, which is part of what brings us here, and and what language is and how that plays out, because I see them as very similar. We need to come together and understand what we each bring to the table, our skills, abilities, our understandings of the world, what we think our context is, all of this sort of higher level thinking that we've all put years and years and years of work into in our own separate streams. And what it is to actually look at language, it's the same thing. It's like we don't all agree, or we don't all know, rather, what each other means necessarily when we say certain words. So I see this process and this conversation that we're in as being one that actually directly correlates to our constitution, our co-constitution of what we're doing here, and gives us another frame to look at how we come to agreement about what we mean when we're talking. And what's even more fascinating about that is that we're practicing this methodology around communication that is aiming to bring understanding of deeper, more who we are and what we bring, so that we can see a different constituent shape between us. And so I think that even though it may seem like we're talking about this little tiny thing, well, I don't think any of us really believe that language is a little tiny thing, but you know, this one discrete aspect of the work that we're doing here together is fractal, and it has meaning within all of what we're doing, to be able to co-constitute and come to understanding first of who we are, what we bring, and what we will choose to enact together. So that's that whole chunk. But I'm also conscious of Peter. Welcome. Thank you for joining. It's nice to see you. Peter and I did a session which I haven't released on Friday, after Doug and Fabian and I had our amazing sessions together. So in Peter's and my session, we really looked at vocal eyes, as in vocal eyes, and the democratic and that democratic tool that he's created. That's something that we can use as well to kind of explicate our values and alignment, and look at the issues that we're looking at within a frame and a form that has been tested and is out there as something that we can use. So I wanted to plant that seed within this group. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Tammy and Sam, I need to hug you for what you just said. I was just talking to Peter in parallel or before, but I want to go back to Occupy and Speaker's Corner, because all these loaded terms like trust and love are so central. You see, I was at this bifurcation when Consilium and Wikipedia split. So there were two founders and they had different ideas. Consilium, which was much more in our idea because it was much more participatory and normative. So I only want to say I'm so happy, and I really will send in a link to what we did with Occupy and the Speaker's Corner at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin some years ago, to really look into the ways we share trust and encourage trust. And maybe one last thing, we do an encyclopedia of systems and cybernetics now in a virtual format, where all terms have a footnote to give the meaning in the certain discipline. And now we want to do it in the certain context in specific languages. So all these things which are coming out from the ground here, I dearly love. And I think we should give all the eyes and ears now to Peter.
Oh, the pressure. Hi, everyone. Well, I haven't. Okay, I mean, I don't have a lot to say on the word greed, to be honest. It's not something I spend a huge amount of time thinking about. A few things did come up. So I think a lot of greed, I'll just say what I've written down. A lot of greed is people operating very effectively in a system that rewards that type of behavior. So we can all be greedy, but I think Anna said this, I think a lot of greed is people being really effective, but inside our profit-based system. And just the way that our system is set up, people overeating and all of this sort of stuff, again, is a systemic thing. There's so much food available and there's so much sugar available, there's so many addictive substances available. If you make all of that available for people, then people just aren't going to be able to help themselves. There's a lot of people that won't be able to help themselves. So I think personally, I'm of the mind that if we improve our systems and if we improve our environment, then people will be less greedy and they'll act more, they'll act better. Behaviorism is largely in response to our environment, I think. So the greed isn't of a particular importance to me. The shaping our environment is really important to me. That's what I'm focused on. How do we change the environment that we all live in? And I've categorized those in three areas. That's our groups, our social groups, our geographic communities, and our workplaces. And that covers our home lives in geographic communities, it covers our social lives and social groups, and our professional lives in organizations. It's kind of a simple way of looking at it. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm focusing on. And how do you change those environments? And so what Tammy was referring to with these digital democracy tools, what I've discovered is that if you can enable and empower these people inside these organizations to have a conversation rather than a consultation, so a conversation being this ongoing thing where people can discuss and prioritize ideas under any topic. If you can enable that, because current consultation, it tends to be a snapshot in time, like a camera. So it's like a linear, I see it as a horizontal thing. It's the consultation down at the village hall with post-it notes and paper tablecloths and big sheets of paper. It happens at one particular time or a few times. In colleges and in education, usually it's one survey a year. And that is the consultation, you know. And quite often in that big consultation, people will be asked, how well do you think you were listened to? And that's the first time they've had a chance to respond. So the digital democracy tool ends up performing a task of listening. It's a listening tool, and it's always listening. And so then when you get your survey that comes in and does a snapshot in time at the end of the year, how well do you think you've been listened to, there's this other mechanism in place that enables that. And what I found is that if organizations are able to generate data around their priorities, this completely transforms the governance structure inside that organization. Because where a council, let's say a student parliament, but you could be a staff voice council, it could be a tenant council, it could be a student council, it could be a community council. None of them, generally speaking, are coming to those meetings with printout of the priorities from the thousands of people that they represent. It's largely based on guesswork. And this is why the representative democracy is so hollowed out and why people are so disenfranchised with it. And if you can create that data by doing, in education, two things. One is the technical piece, which is integrating into their systems, which are their intranets. So they generally use, in the UK at least, SharePoint and Moodle and Blackboard. More recently, they're starting to use mobile apps. And then the engagement piece is around integration into the curriculum. And almost all curriculums now have ESD, which is Education for Sustainable Development, which Heine is well involved in. I'm sure many people here have been involved in ESD. So there are citizenship elements and also digital skills elements already inside the curriculum. So this becomes the engagement piece. So I'm just saying that, yeah. So as an example, a college that's within 100 yards of where I live, they've now got 1,500 students out of 10,000. So it's around 15% of all students are engaging in digital democracy, which has produced a priority list of 70 ideas where every single idea is rated between 500 and 800 times. And on there as well, you've got comments for and against and neutral. So just imagine the transformation now. The student council was opening up the suggestion box and pulling out cigarette papers and bubblegum wrappers. sitting around their table going, now, what are the priorities for the 10,000 people inside this college across 4 campuses? And now they're sitting in that meeting with this list of 70 ideas where they've all been rated between 400 and 800 times each. And they've got all these comments on them. Now they've got a serious job to do. They've got something to seriously represent. We are representing that data. And the senior management team, who hold the budgets and make, you know, the ultimate decision makers, they make a space on their monthly meetings to receive the priorities from the student council. So the student council say, okay, well, we'll send these 4 cheaper, healthier lunches. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants water fountains outside the gym. People want bike sheds. You know, they want solar panels on the roof of the school. All of this goes up to senior management team. They're all reasonable suggestions. Yeah, why would they don't refuse most of them. The only reason that they don't get enacted might be because they're bus shelters and they cost £80,000 and they haven't got the money. But then they figure out some other way. But you've got this conversation going on, and this lack of conversation that is a real problem. So yeah, I shall stop there. One last point, just in terms of how it might change webinars. Any event is, if you've got an ongoing conversation that can continue between meetings, whether the meetings are webinars or whether they're face-to-face in a village hall or whatever. But again, it means that we can come here and we can start a dialogue around the priorities that are happening and emerging inside the conversation. And it's going, well, it is clearly a focus for us, peeps, because we all think that this particular thing that someone suggested is a priority. So, and now what you can do, we can start moving meaningfully and say, well, who's prepared to create a working group around this priority to research it further? And it's not for everyone, but these 3 people have got skills in that area. These 3 people can get together around this priority and research potential solutions, and then at the next meeting can then present those solutions. Right, we've got a presentation from this working group, and they're going to present solutions on liquid democracy, or, you know, what is the meaning of greed, or whatever it is, you know. And then people start forming relationships around a common endeavor, and you've got some sort of process now, you know, and we're feeling like we're making progress because priorities come up, working groups form, and then we enact solutions, and we're going around in a circle.
Right. I like that. Let me reinforce what Peter was saying, in that one of the things I really dislike about our current form of democracy, at least here in the United States, is when a decision gets made, usually there's a very long time where a very small group of people determine what the options are that need to be presented to the populace. And for a very short time, you know, usually considered a day of election or maybe a few weeks prior to that for some press coverage of the issue, okay? Then some very short time, sound bites are used to convey understanding to the populace that they then select A or B on, okay? So the bulk of the population, the huge amount of population, is not using much judgment or much, you know, rational thought or much, you know, simulation or much understanding, but that task has been delegated or usurped by a small number of people. Again, judgment word, okay? By a small number of people creating their own language that allows them to play the game very well so that they end up winning. And I would much rather see a very small amount of time being created within this small group, okay? I would prefer to see a large amount of time where everybody, just as Peter is describing, it's to contribute to the available solutions. And it may not be just 2, it may be 3 or 4 or 5 that we then have to pare down to 1. But there's a big process there, okay? Rather than having a small group of people determine the options available to the millions, okay? So that's idea number 1. Question I would just ask is, I recognize that the word greed does have some connotations which are unfortunate and undesirable for some. In economics, if there is a notion built around the fact that we are entities who try to take care of our own resources, make sure we have enough, make sure that we select from the commons or, buy and purchase, use our criteria, our power, our available currency. If you don't like the word greed for that, what word would you use? Over.
I would use need instead of greed.
And I think it's a point of coming into balance. Like, first, we need to look at, what is, and what is that there's a huge imbalance in the world. And people know that from a multiplicity of perspectives. So I think that there. And I think that just tagging on what Harry said is that, what is the need? I think all of us here are deeply considering how we can bring our world back into balance, starting with ourselves. And so what are the needs that are being expressed?
I think I was just citing Gandhi with needs and greeds. There's not enough for all our greeds. You see, all this has scales, proportions, consequences. And so I was with Peter an half an hour before we assembled here. I fully subscribe to his work in town halls, in schools, in community centers. And I think this work to focus on solutions is very, very important. Where I ended up with Peter was voting is also such a different thing. Are you voting on priorities? Like, I want to be president, and you become vice president, and you become whatever treasurer? Or do you vote on influences? And this is the next step. I talked to Peter a moment ago on dropout rates in schools, in negative image projects, that you try to find the deep root causes. And this is what is done in Reinventing Democracy project of the United Nations Democracy Fund. I happen to be a tutor and mentor there, so I know a little bit that when you go to the deep root causes, like the American Indians do, like the Maoris do now, then you really negotiate with the people, bottom up, to go to the wisdom of the people. All this is work done by Christakis, Warfield, Özbekan in the 60s. All this I would like to merge with all your blockchain or the work Peter is doing. And I'm very happy to be here.
Just picking up on that, Heiner said, all this is work done. And I think most of us, if we think of a problem, we can, if we rack our brains, we can probably, a video we've watched, a website we've seen, a community or group that has or is implementing a solution, or if not several solutions. So in my view, and of course there may be a small number of problems that haven't been solved anywhere yet, but I think it's very minimal. And so I see the priority of our time being replication. How is it that we replicate all this work that is already done everywhere and into all the relevant places? And not that we replicate it, but that we create a system that enables people to decide what it is that they need to replicate it, and then to enable them to adapt it to their own local circumstances, and to crowdsource it into a local ownership project. So the replication piece, it all boils down to replication for me. Innovation is going to happen anyway, from bedrooms and garages and universities and all the rest of it. But when that one really good things, when all of these good things happen in all of these little, tiny little communities and groups and workplaces all over the world, how quickly can we replicate that amazing project into all similar communities all throughout the world? Yeah, so in the UK, there are 450 colleges. So how quick is it that one college starts a subsidized healthy eating campaign? How quick is it that the other 450 colleges start that subsidized healthy eating campaign? In fact, imagine how many colleges there are in the world. And in a similar way to geographic communities, there's 7 billion people on the planet. There's approximately 7,000 people in each community on average. So that's 1 million communities, all having a very similar conversation. And again, all of this best practice, if you can imagine that we create through a Wikipedia of projects, that we create a repository of best practice, and that best practice feeds vertically down through all of these 1 million communities so that they can discover them and prioritize them and adapt them and replicate them, it becomes a much more easy to understand problem, I think.
I think it is replication, but also connecting. We call it a chain of message. There are many good solutions, but they have to communicate to each other. And one solution is better here and the other is there. So we might need to have solutions for small issues and for solutions bridging workable, pragmatical solutions together, because otherwise we are fixed in perplexity.
I want to throw a curveball into this, and if I can, I'd love to do it through share it. Go ahead, Peter. You're muted.
I was just getting ready to catch it. Yeah.
So I spent a couple of years working with a guy named David Preston, who was the high school English teacher. He was a PhD in education at one of the big left coast universities, and he was looking at American education, public education, which is horribly broken, and so he really get out of the ivory tower and get, as he put it, behind the chain link fence. He wouldn't be able to figure that out. And so he took a job teaching high school English at a Central Coast typical California public high school. And he decided to sort of reframe the deal. He said, okay, I am going to change teacher into guide and facilitator. I'm going to change classroom student cohort into learning community. I'm going to put the reins and control and authority in the hands of the members of that community to steer and drive and evolve their own learning experience. And I'll incorporate the standing requirements and curriculum because they have to be there, but not as a end destination to test, but as a launching platform to learn. So a beginning point rather than an ending point.
I think there's someone who's typing that's coming through. So if you can mute yourself.
So David did this. And once the students realized he meant it and that they were really in the driver's seat, it sort of took off. So by the end of the first year, 98% of the students sat for AP exams. everybody well completed all of the existing prerequisites and tests and requirements. But above and beyond that, this one class generated over 220,000 unique artifacts by and between themselves. Everything from internal to each other and to the community communications, to games, to projects, to group undertakings, to reading sharings, and beyond. Like off the charts, whole different universe. So, and I coined the description of what he did as open source learning, because he also blew the walls of the university down. He had internet connectivity in the classroom, tremendous amount of use of internet-based and cloud-based, resources, wikis, blogs, emails for the class, all of that. So that was the first year. Now the second year rolled around, and there were a couple of things that had been created by the first year cohort that were like just huge wins. And there was almost a reflexive, well, of course, those things will be integrated or thrown out for the community. And they worked brilliantly, and they were unbelievably powerful and generative. And lo and behold, the next year, the community was a different community. And they didn't want to inherit anything. None of the things that were the biggest, most exciting and innovative and creative expressions of the first cohort were of any interest to the second cohort. And the essential learning in it was that they had to create their own learning journey and community and solutions. They had to be part of the creation of them, to own them, and for them to be fueled, self and internally and community generated and evolved and expressed, right? So, and I know this was sort of a long, shaggy dog way of getting to where I wanted to go, but there's a fixation, and I think almost a presumption or cognitive bias that focuses on a solution, a system, a program, a tool, as mapping to an extrapolated salvation of everybody. And I think it's a false premise. I think that whole construct is a straw man. It's completely like, it's an industrial construct. I can fix it. The right tool, I can solve everybody's problem. And so, Peter, to me, and I understand how you framed what you're doing and the success of what you're doing, which I applaud and acknowledge, and I think I'm a big supporter or believer in what you're doing. I don't look at it as the value is being in the data. I look at it as what you've enabled is the enfranchisement and the voice and the distribution of power, authority, recognition to the members of these units or organizations or communities to play. Like, there's a channel, you're creating a channel, right? And from the channel comes the gold, comes all of the generative potential of every single person in a school or in a community or in a whatever. And so and this is the human being-centered thing, right? So I'm interested in, how do we release the generative potential of every man, woman, and child on the planet? And backing up from that idea, the first sort of step is, how do we plug them in so we can hear them? And they can hear us. Like, just on the most basic level. How do we connect everybody? And We have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the resources, we have the means literally to do that. It's just right now all the technology resources are being purposed for the industrial profit commercial purpose, where we're commodities generating data, right? Facebook, Google, we're data machines that they can capitalize on. I'm done.
And I would follow on to that with us landing in the me and this we. And I know that many of us hold in our hearts the need to help the world. And I would put forward with this group that we need to help ourselves and who it is that we are. And, you know, part of what we would, that we've talked about in terms of how do we scale this? Well, I think we're at that point of the process where we are learning how to listen to each other, how to conceptualize what we're actually talking about, doing some kicks in the language world. What do we actually mean? And that's backing us into this. What does it mean to me? And I think that without that me in it, then it doesn't have any meaning.
Go, ego.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, Dirk. I mean, I'm totally with you, and what I was referring to really was just one aspect of the way that enabling a conversation enables change. Hold on a second. Can someone else take over?
Let me observe that there are now a very rich clumps of pudding in this pool of meeting, okay? Various different little clumps are forming in this pool that's getting larger and larger and larger. And it's bewildering in my own mind, because I'm limited to one or two thoughts at a time, to figure out how each of these clumps can be either nurtured or poisoned, because I think, I don't think how to grow. None of that, actually has happened. But I'm suggesting that we consider for ourselves the question of, if there are pools of meaning now, one pool of meaning that contains these various different organisms that are trying to live. Here's a lily pond over here, here's a frog over here. Let's try and see if they can grow. How do we do that? Either we can adopt localize, or we can adopt, debate graph from some David Price, my friend, or we can build a system to do it. Right now, for the moment, it's imperfect, but there is a mechanism where we can create channels for each of these little organisms that may want to be nurtured. And I'm referring to channels within Slack. So there is, for example, last Thursday, I created a channel called Values, because values turned out to be a kind of a rich topic. We may, in fact, out of today, create something either called language or Dictopedia or, whatever that results in this. There may be even enough energy and enough people that we create an entire channel for greed itself. We can see whether or not that draws people. But I'm kind of wondering if we can do this. I'm trying to I'm trying to collect from this pool those things that, I see want to grow, and see if we can actually nurture them and grow them, rather than having this very serial process through this conversation, which, again, is of interest to some, maybe, less interest to others. I'm trying to see whether we can parallelize our efforts. You can see there are 9. There was quite a bit of time where some of these calls only had 4 people, right? And we can see that maybe if we're attracting more and more interested parties, next quarter we may have more, like 25 or 30. Who knows what the number is going to be. So it doesn't have to be Slack. I'm just suggesting Slack exists, and it's one way to try and create these conversations around these specific, I don't even want to call them subtopics, because that's another loaded word, but these, things that people want to talk about. So that's just a little suggestion. And eventually we may end up using something like localize. It may be a very good experiment to try and do that. It sounds very effective. Yeah, but again, to Doug's point, we have to own this issue. We have to own the process. We have to own it individually and as a group, and then decide to go forth that way. And while we're still trying to form this community, we don't yet have a group adopted way of how do we make decisions? How do we even create a how-to? How do we even identify us as a group, of active people? How do we even decide to foster a suggestion and turn a suggestion into an action? So that's why my interest in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks has been in these set of how-tos, and I would encourage everyone to experiment with that notion and say, what's the best way to, in a granular fashion, create these little nuggets of learning that we can, individually circulate among ourselves for review and hopefully adopt, and hopefully build up a corpus of these things that at some point may resemble the more standard charter, but in a living way that actually adapts to learning, adapts to new members, and adapts to change within the community, and also from external factors. Over.
I think that's why we called it living democracy. You see, I really like your analytical approach on synthesizing what we do in lists like linear. But this clustering, going to the deep drivers, this is this work done in peacemaking projects where you have multi-track diplomacy, where you not have just two enemies and then someone shuttling between them, but really going into meanings and fightings and all this. I think it is all open software, linking very much to what Peter is saying, going, if you really want to make it a process, sometimes it's taking more than a weekend, then it is helpful to really getting people together who are totally different, having totally different languages. I think your synthesis approch, not just
I'm really
Yes?
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but Peter actually had his hand up and was wanting to respond before you started.
I didn't see the hand.
I think.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to, just to back up really what Hein was saying, is there's not so much of a process in Facebook and Slack. It's it's what you might call a forum. It's a forum style conversation, but it's not a process driven conversation that clearly shows priorities and then enables us to form working groups around priorities and log actions. Everything you were saying there, Sam, I think are the ingredients of the digital democracy tools, or what should be there. Certainly Vocalize it's way beyond what they call MVP, which is minimum viable product. I mean, it's been in operation for about 3 years now, but when you start using it, I have absolutely no doubt you will think, oh, it would be really nice if it did this and did that. And on Vocalize, there is a Vocalize users group with about 150 administrators in there, and they're all feeding back ways that they would like to see the digital democracy platform improved. And this is the self-governance, self-improvement element of it, that, and they refer to that in the Global Challenges bid, you might recall, as one of the questions. So, if there are things, I suppose this is the exciting piece, will be the exciting piece for me, was that if we started using it as a group, with all of your knowledge and depth of knowledge, the process drawings that I've seen and the amount of learning I've gathered already just from being around you guys for a week or so, we could start to prioritize how that would integrate into the software to help facilitate more empowering conversations inside organizations. And it's a direct democracy platform at the moment, which means that everybody has a say on everything. And the evolution of that becomes a liquid democracy platform which is where, because direct democracy will become too overwhelming, because once you have a say inside every group on every topic, you're going to end up with 1,000 ideas to rate under 500 topics in 200 groups. It's going to be totally overwhelming, yeah? But you said you wanted to have a voice, and now you have a voice. Right? So we solved the problem first, and now that's direct democracy. And as an evolving process, we start to build in efficiencies into that, so I don't have to answer all of these 800 ideas myself, or these particular. And the way that we start to build in efficiencies is that I start to nominate people I trust. So I've met Tammy, I've met you guys, I trust you all on certain, not everything, on certain subject matter. Yeah. So I trust Doug on this, I trust Harry on this, I trust Glenn on this, and Sam on this, and Heino on this, and Tammy on that. And I'm starting to delegate away my topics and my ideas that I have a little understanding on to people who I know and trust. Now, you guys are all slightly empowered because I trust you. And if we all do that, we all become incredibly empowered, because now I have 1,000 people or 5,000 people, just like you have a Twitter following of God knows how many followers. You become, this many people now trust you. And they've given you basically a reputation, essentially, for that piece of for that subject matter. And so everybody has their place, where they basically become recognized for the things that they're passionate about, and they're able to use that passion with influence. So they're not just turning up to a meeting with passion about green projects or homelessness or whatever it is. It's like, I'm turning up here with this passion, but also this number of people have also put their trust in me. So now I also have influence. I'm not just a maverick with a crazy idea. But that whole process and journey of liquid democracy, it's all still to come. That's the journey, that's the evolution. There's no simple fix right now, this is going to fix it all. And there's a couple of examples of liquid democracy. There's one in Berlin with a tool called liquid feedback. But I'm not recommending we jump into liquid democracy. I'm recommending that everyone experiences direct democracy first, and then we evolve efficiencies. And what that looks like in the future, remains to be seen.
I love how that links to some of Arthur Brock's work on reputational currency. So taking it beyond the democratic piece and de-siloing that in a way to look at how our reputation does influence how people perceive what we're saying and what we stand for.
I really don't understand.
Oh.
Okay, you carry on, Glenn.
Anna, I think if you don't understand something, that's really important for the group to hear.
Okay, I don't understand what it is, Peter, that you are asking us as a group to do. I know that you put something up on Facebook, which was to do with action. And presumably that is action outside the group. That would be something that people took on projects and then sort of did those projects and reported back in some way. But yeah, I don't get a feel of what it is that you're asking us as a group to do in response to what you're bringing.
I know you've asked Peter, but I'm going to jump in because Peter and I did have a session on Friday where I just haven't had time to wrap that up. And I was inspired to consider using Vocalize for us to be able to have our participation with some of the ideas that we're talking about logged. One of the things that I've felt all along and kind of informs my way of of being here is that every person brings something really important. So that's part of why I used Sam's community contribution, communication and commitment to collaborate, and the how-tos and these different practices and protocols, because I think we need to use each other's stuff. So I had put forward that Othello also does the same thing, but John Richardson, who is amazing, isn't currently participating in our group sessions. So I thought it would be good, in coming from a place of honoring people's work, is to just look at Peter's work and see, if we could use that to be able to clarify and democratically participate with our priorities in this group. I'm not saying that we have to do that, but I'm seeing a usefulness in doing that, and I wanted to bring that to this group to consider.
Well, I just want to say that what Doug said about not using what's already been developed is really how I feel. It's absolutely up to anybody, surely, who wants to do that, to form a little group to do that.
Just to clarify, Anna, when you said that you use things that have already been created, what did you mean, or what did you understand from Doug about what that meant? Because I'm taking in a lot of information in this 2.5 hour call, and I'm trying to grok everything, but I don't have it all.
Well, Doug gave the example of a class that produced a lot of exciting stuff, but the next class that came along didn't want to use the stuff that somebody else had developed. That's all it was. And I mean, maybe it's prejudice I have, but I'm quite happy just with, what we're experiencing and doing here. If other people want to use that, then surely that's...
Yeah, that's great. So I think there are two proposals here. One is, I think Tammy's suggesting you might try out a digital democracy tool. I don't think it's really matters. Well, you could try out various different ones. I know Luke Flegg is part of this group, and he's actually put together an Excel sheet on various different tools. So I think Vocalize ranks pretty highly in that, and obviously every tool is going to facilitate a slightly different experience for people. So it's totally up to you as to whether you want to have a go. But I do think, Gandhi said, you need to be the change. So if you haven't had an experience with direct democracy yet, then this might be an easy way to do it. Obviously, I can handhold the whole process and train anyone that and the added advantage is that if you guys come up with suggestions on improvements, then we've got some development capacity to be able to improve the platform. So you might actually see the platform evolving, in response to our own group and our own needs. And that's what I think is really exciting. I don't think you'd necessarily get that response from any other platform, not that I'm aware of anyway. So that's an option. The other thing was I put on a suggestion saying, would anybody like to join an action group, action learning group? And what I mean by that is people actually applying new forms of governance to organizations and empowering organizations. So that's what I'm doing, day to day, is embedding digital democracy and crowdsourcing and participatory budgeting and community organizing inside organizations to empower people to self-organize, which results in good ideas being suggested, prioritized, and turned into action, and results in organizations, groups, and communities improving themselves. through their own process. So you're not giving them any other tool other than a tool that helps them discover and prioritize and adapt and learn and turn good ideas into action. So that was the action learning. I'd be really interested to work with any, and empower any other organization that people would like to work with. It's a fascinating process to go through that culture change and to lead people through that culture change and to see the organization change, and that you've been the instigator of that. And now we're on a journey. You see, once they've installed a digital democracy tool, they can't turn it off, because they like Gower College ended up with 15%, 1,500 students engaged, within a short amount of time. It's not something, once you turn it on, you can't turn it off. They're now on a journey, and they're on a journey to 100% engagement. And they're on a journey to where participation is the norm. Yeah? So they're going to, once they integrate into the curriculum, they're going to have 100% engagement. Imagine the amount of data that's going to produce. And Doug, just to go back to your point, the data represents, as you say, I know we're totally on the same page here, the data represents a learning journey that every single one of those students has gone through. Every single one of those students has watched the little video, the 73, and considered each idea. So the data represents a journey on behalf of the individuals, and a certain amount of power, in a sense, that each idea now has. So it's, yes, the word data doesn't really hold a lot of meaning as such, but there is a lot in this new culture. It's understanding what the meaning is behind that data, and it's a fascinating thing. It's a good thing to point out. Thank you.
So Sam has to go, and he's the one recording our session. It could be carried on, but for myself, I'm getting to my capacity moment. Do you have a few minutes to just do a checkout before you go?
Let me do a quick one. I do think that I almost did it the last time I spoke, which is that there are so many good topics and good threads of conversation that we need to find a way to continue them and build these little subgroups, special interest groups, SIGs, whatever you want to call them, that can, basically allow individuals to opt in with their own energy, attention, feet, fingers, words, etc. And whether it's localized, whether it's Slack, whatever, let's just do it. Facebook exists, Slack exists. Some people believe Facebook is better. Some people believe Slack is better. I don't think we're at a stage where yet we even have an identity where we can say, hey, everybody use this, blah. We've tried to create those kind of decision processes, but they haven't yet formed. So people vote with their feet, So those who want to use Slack, I can create channels in Slack and we can do it there. For people who want to do threads on Facebook, I guess you're going to vote that way and do it there. For people who want to try localize, and I actually want to say I'm one of them, okay? I would like to try that and do it there. For people who want to use Ethello, do it there. I don't know Ethello. I'm probably not going to get to know Ethello since John is not there. But I think in a meta level, I'd like to see a way for us to create momentum around these multiplicity of topics or conversation groups, and that we can then try and figure that out. Now, I do suggest that around this question of how do we make decisions, who are we as an identity, how are we going to get some form of decision-making made, that's still underlying a lot of these conversations. Our values, that's underlying a lot of these conversations. So there is a values channel in Slack. There is a set of how-tos in Slack. Personally, I'm opting in there because I think that's better than Facebook. You don't have to agree with me, but that's where my contributions are going to go until we get something better. So that would be not a checkout so much as just a meta level. How do we gather all this and herd all these cats so that we don't lose a lot of what's been said, or we don't lose a bunch of energy simply because somebody says, nobody responded to my topic over there. The topic of safety was raised very early. It really hasn't been discussed lately, right? And yet I think it's still central, or at least underpinning a lot of these other conversations. So anyway, my suggestion is let's figure that out. Opt in with your feet, opt in with your fingers. There are at least 2 tools out there already. We can add a third, we can add a fourth, whatever, but at least there are 2 already where we can actually carry these conversations forth. And I think, once we see some momentum, then we can have how-to of how do we change from one tool to another. That'll be an interesting one, right? So anyway, that's my form of a checkout for now. Thanks.
I'll just pipe in quickly. In terms of adopting a digital democracy tool, because it's not just a forum, that doesn't really matter. For the forum, there's no consequence for people opting in or out. It's just a flow, a natural flow. Obviously, anything that comes down to decision making, the more people you really need an adoption into the culture. And the more it is adopted into the heart of the culture, the more meaningful the whole process becomes. So I'll just throw that in there. If you've got each one of us trying an individual democratic platform, it's not going to be very useful because none of us are going to have very meaningful data.
So I'd love to invite us to do a bit of a closing round. I'm personally getting a bit fatigued and would like to do a bit of a harvest. So I'd like to share a little bit about, what I'm going to do. There's some of what I learned that I'd like to be able to articulate, but I'm just going to straight up say what I'm going to do as a consequence to this coming together of awesomeness. And first of all, I just deeply appreciate everyone here to come so beautifully to this moment, to try and wrestle with these big deal things. And there's just so much appreciation to have you. It feels like a family. It feels like a place that, touching really on what Sam was talking about safety, I feel that our earnestness in being here creates a space that allows me to really share in the ways that I think we need to learn to share to grow our capacities in terms of the ways of being that can help us navigate through to the transitions that we're in. So deep gratitude. And then in terms of what I'm going to do, I will write a blog and embed Peter video in there. But actually what I need to do, I think, is just page. I didn't want to overwhelm with too much because on Friday there was 3 podcasts that were created in the morning. And I've also, I have personal limitations in terms of what I can actually complete and do. So what I'll do is immediately after this meeting, I'll post the piece that Peter and I did and not worry too much about the blog. I hope to get to that today. I did join Vocalize, but I don't see how to create a new group. So Peter, if you can help with that. I tried all the buttons and I meant to talk about that at the end of our session, but that wasn't obvious to me. And I'd like to have a look at that and see how we can migrate just see what that looks like, kick the tires and start to understand how that can be used to facilitate our democratic process of coming to understanding about what it is we're wanting to focus our attention on. And I'm also, in terms of what I can commit to doing is I've been really spending as much time as possible reviewing the recent pieces that we're in. So, I'm learning a lot about myself and about how because there's this metacognition thing that happens when I'm viewing myself, remembering what I was thinking, where I interjected or not, as the case may be, and there's just so much rich learning in being able to kind of parse oh my gosh, Harry got that part, and these physiological cues that we see as we're in presence in this way. Anyway, deep richness, and I'm continuing my learning journey with that. And I would really invite people to also do that, because I think the conversation that emerges from our witnessing of ourselves in this process to come to understanding of what we're being and doing here adds another layer of potential understanding and context, and it gives us some tools to use to really reflect and more deeply understand what's going on here, because I think we can all feel that it's powerful, and I think that we need to articulate why that is, so that we can continue to do that learning journey as we empower ourselves, really. So that's what I'll commit to doing.
I think this session was thrilling and awesome, and I enjoyed it because this synthetic philosophical approach, being connected with a practical, down-to-earth and local experience, I think this is a synthesis. I have two critical points. One, all these politicians form a committee. We should not go into forming committees too early. And you see, we looked into the beginning of liquid democracy with all these Occupy people and all this discussion. I think there's some richness in there. And I really would like to tell you what this American Indian have been doing on expanding the talking stick method and how they go into influence voting. And the second critical point, I was not aware that we lift our finger and then this is the next in the circle. You see, I know software where you really have a speaker's queue. This is very competitive and I don't like it. And I'm excusing myself by speaking too much, and maybe it cannot be understood, or it goes to references at a certain moment do not fit. But I think we should really talk about, is there someone moderating it, like Tammy has been doing it very well before, or if we apply the speakers list, which is also possible in Zoom. So there are many things to go about this elbowing competitiveness. Oh, I want to speak. This time I didn't speak my 1/10 of the session. And Tammy and Doug had also their quarter to really go into emergence generative, to use all Doug's words. Thank you very much. I liked it.
I can just say, okay, yeah, I had some moments here too when I really wanted to say something, but then others are talking. But that was interesting anyway. A very rich conversation. There's a few things which, well, it's this very rich conversation, and many topics, many questions have been mentioned, many ideas, and we find it a little bit overwhelming. And maybe that's okay for a while. Maybe that chaotic thing can be good. At the same time, I also feel there's a need to find a better way to get out the main nuggets of gold. Yeah, and the question of participation. I really feel, first of all, what we've done so far, I think it's extraordinary. I think we're doing really good, and we're building this culture, and I feel there is an interest in understanding point of view here, and even if we all want to speak on it, it sort of balances itself out. At the same time, there's it's a lot of information. It's overwhelming, and that's okay. Okay. One specific point I can mention. Using the chat used for some messages has been used to sum up a summary. I don't think the chat is very good to write a summary of the conversation, because then one person has to focus on that. It's easier to do it afterwards. What I would like to see at some point is one list of all the videos in a chronological sequence with the names of the people there, and keywords for the themes, and a synopsis of what was said. Possibly even literally word for word. I very strongly feel that the question of the best software, and I can say I've so far never seen any platform which is close to optimal. I feel that the right platform has not been invented yet. There's also three things which I've written down, which seems to be something we all agree about. We all have the world-centric vision, want a better world for everyone, a sustainable world. This is the sort of overlying theme. There's also this theme of personal responsibility, that we're each responsible for our own contribution. And then there's the notion of evolution. We want to have an open-ended process where we can learn and continuously improve and take on data, take on new insights as they come in. And now let's say we try a certain platform, Vocalize. I haven't been in there yet, but let's say we do that. So if we can have an evolutionary process which is effective, then it doesn't really matter where we begin, because if we discover improvements along the road, we can then begin from one place and then add on that. And then there's the point which was made about participation. That also I feel is very, very, I just feel certain that is a part of the solution, even for the whole world. That there has to be something which invites us to participate actively ourselves. And that's actually why sometimes I'm hesitant to even say what I'm thinking, because when someone else says something, that's the difficulty of communication in a way. It's like, if it's going to work, we kind of have to come to it ourselves. And this was also a theme which Neil Davidson talked about from his experience, that when he's effective as a facilitator, he talked with the Harry. He kind of does something which makes people think themselves and come to the solutions and stuff. So that's also why this is successful, as far as I can tell, very successful. We're doing very well. So those were some of the main points. Yeah, and when it comes to working groups, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Action groups, projects, specific projects. That I think that will happen naturally. But at the moment, I don't see that we so far it's a little bit messy about what themes we've had, and maybe more of us have to review the conversations, write some notes. I've done it a little bit, and it's very rewarding, very interesting work. I want to do some more of it. Haven't had time in the last few weeks, but some of it can be done manually, sure, and it's valuable time. I mean, it's not like you're wasting your time if you're listening to this and taking notes. But in the dream world, I would have software which just automatically writes down everything we say and attach it to the names. I think that's also a part of the solution. Because if we're going to scale this, there will be information overload. So how to deal effectively with information? That also seems like a very big, important piece of this puzzle. Yeah, I think it's been so many things today. So I've been real happy to join in on a lot of gold. I think everything that everyone brings here is just gold. So thanks. I mean, it's really awesome. So over from me.
I'm going to have to shoot in 2 minutes, so I've just got a sentence I've written down here. But thanks for the call, everybody. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Glenn. As long as there's an effective evolutionary process built in, the most important thing is to take the first step. Let's embark on the journey and begin to actively solve these issues. If we can't find the software out there that writes what we're saying, let's build it. You know, it's all out there already. It's not going to take a lot to pull it together. Yeah, these things have already been built. So we just need to pull all the ingredients into the right place, and that is really the whole project. That with localize and vocalize, if you look into it, that's all it is. There's very little new there. It's just a completely different way of cooking. It's all about cooking. So all the ingredients are out there, but it's the way that they've been mixed together and the way that you put them in the oven determines the type of cake that you get out of it. So let's do some baking. That's what I suggest. Okay, peeps, till next time. Thanks very much indeed.
And on that note, Heiner has a recipe. Become the change maker. Yes.
There we are. We're all change makers, I think.
Nice.
But I insist on dancing and cooking.
That could get messy. Whoa!
Thinking about formation dancing, not partnership dancing with two only.
Yeah.
Circle
I look forward
dancing.
to that. Bye.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, I'll check out very quickly. I've enjoyed it. Haven't really got anything to add. I just felt it was great to be here. Thank you.
Thank
you. Harry, you want to go last?
No, I enjoyed the richness of the company and the conversation. I think we created a huge pool of meaning, and I agree with what Glenn said. We still need a way to kind of distill the nuggets of gold we can use out of that, and that's something that's probably not invented yet, but that's something that stays on my mind, what I take out of it, what can be a next step in kind of trying to invent this meaning machine that works, makes it easy for all of us to have all these thoughts and kind of, it's like deconstructing the Tower of Babel, something like that. So I don't have a solution, but and this is multidimensional. I let my unconscious part of the brain process it a little as well. Thanks a lot for now. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're all here. This is really stuff of life. And I'm going to plant a teaser. Glenn, you're absolutely right. It hasn't been built yet. All the technology required to support it exists. Nothing has to be created or invented. It's about inverting existing technology in service to human beings rather than human beings broken to and programmed to serve the machines. So this has been an obsession for 5 years. The vision of this, what does that mean? And I gave it a name. It's the only opaque thing in Fabian's and my work over the last 3 years, and I call it the collective metacognition machine works. And it's a three-dimensional, multi-layered, multifaceted vision for serving people that come together and want to work and play together. And it's through a human experiential lens. So it's no one tool, it's no one language, it's no one anything. It's what works for me is what I should confront when I log in, and what works for Tammy should be what she experiences when she logs in. And it really needs to serve each individual in the way they're most valuably supported in their generativity and engagement, with zero barriers to entry. Like you start thinking in those terms, then it drives a completely different design process. So it's something that I think I'm headed into a session with Tammy and Fabian about to share and explain as far as we've gotten. It's not something we've built. It's something we're framing and designing and trying to flesh out in terms of what are the needs from a user group, collective human standpoint. What are the specs? What does it have to be able to do for us? And so much should be automated, like automatically capturing this, automatically setting it up in an archive, automatically generating transcript with keyword tagging, frequency of words analyzed. Like all these tools exist, and we shouldn't have to learn how to use them in order to benefit from the fruits of them. So that's my thing on tools. And and I think we can envision that and create that, and those that are coders amongst us can help us integrate and figure out how to make it work. And no mystery. And I don't think it requires money or resources or a lot of planning or extraordinary anything. We just have to think it first, but think it from human beings first. And this is really terrific, and this is generative like crazy. And my commitment, because I really like, Tammy, where you went with that, and so I am going to catch up on all of the videos that I haven't finished, and really try to expand the universe of stuff that could be shared out of Fabian's and my work as grist for future mill for everybody here, so that you could all take a look and share, provide some mind share and ideas on how to enrich it. And with that, I'm complete. Thank you.
So is that all of us? We've all checked out? Thank you so much,
Yeah.
everyone. Very much looking forward to next. Until next time.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.